who are you not listening to? Listening as a skill is just really fundamental in this space because we're working with, so if we're talking about the scope 3, a set of partners. So really kind of understanding and empathizing with those partners, where are they? What are their challenges? Through that sort of deeper listening, that really kind of provides the foundation to then go and solve rather than kind of think, oh, okay, this is the solution, how we're going to push it onto our supply base. A little quote in here is that most people do not listen with their intent to understand, but they listen as an intent to reply. So anything that can be done to build on that workshopping with your strategic partners on key topics, on key ambitions, and then building solutions off the back of it, I think is really, really critical.
The apparel industry is notorious for having complicated, opaque, and long supply chains that are difficult to maneuver, difficult to get change to happen, difficult to really navigate worldwide. Apparel is also home to some of the most exciting decarbonization work and some of the most ambitious climate programs that can really have an impact pretty much in every corner of their supply chain. So who better to speak with on this than H&M? H&M is known for some of the most groundbreaking initiatives in the space, certainly over the last several years. We're excited to welcome Paul Goff, Traceability and Sustainability Product Manager at H&M, who's working on the front lines of supply chain traceability, engagement, and decarbonization. Paul, it's really great to have you on the show.
Great. Thank you so much, Seth. Pleasure to be here.
I'd love to give our audience a bit of an understanding on your role. It's a bit of a mouthful. There's a lot of exciting stuff there. What is it that this role contains?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. So I think first things first, I'm based out of Hong Kong. And so just from a geographical perspective, the H&M, production organization is based out in Asia. And so my role really sits across the production sustainability team and the technology team. So it's a product owner role. So essentially, what my day job looks like is really kind of understanding the business need within that sustainability context, whether that's social or environmental, and then really deploying, technology within our supply chain to understand the impact of our value chain. And so that really kind of encompasses the compliance side as well as some of our ambitions, which, as you said in your introduction, Seth, it's really kind of industry-leading ambitions that we have within our organization.
And Paul, what brought you to this role? Would love to get into a bit of the journey. It's been an exciting one for you.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm not an old-timer in sustainability space. So my background, maybe just very briefly, has sort of come from, consulting background. So with Deloitte and when with some consumer companies, moved over to Asia about 10 years ago, working in whether it's like logistics or in the retail sourcing side. I had quite a series of events that unfolded in my life around about 4 or 5 years ago where, my son was born, big life change. The company that I was working at relocated from Hong Kong to Singapore, and I was also diagnosed with cancer, all within the space of really just a couple of months. So once the dust had settled on a lot of those, although I'm still getting used to being a father, really kind of answering the question of like, what do I want to put my energy into from a career perspective? And sustainability, I mean, thanks to my wife for, putting that one on the table. It was something that really resonated with me. So, since then, I've been sort of pivoting my career to working in sustainability, both, previously at VF and then now sort of the last 3 years at H&M, and loving the space. I think it's just so exciting, really kind of purposeful, every day. And yeah, I love working with my team and the stakeholders who also kind of have that passion for positive change in our planet.
It's so great, Paul, to come to the impact space after, obviously a really dramatic moment where you just sort of realize what you want to focus on, but then coming in also, I think, really at the edge where you can have the most impact as well. I think both of those roles, at VF and H&M, you're kind of really at the front lines and able to do so much. And Paul, could you tell us a bit about some of the challenges that you face in the supply chain, either regional challenges or just challenges based on different parts of the value chain? What is the hard stuff that makes your role so valuable in the organization?
Yeah, so you kind of teed it up in the introduction, Seth, where you were kind of talking about the complexity of the apparel supply chain. So that global, long, multi-tiered supply chain, it's global nature, it's fragmentation, it is also, the resource intensity of some of the processes, and then sort of migrating, some of that legacy capital invested production equipment to those greener energy sources is really kind of a key focus for us.
Well, so many things I want to get into off the back of that. One of the things that I've noticed, having grown up in Pakistan and still visiting, once every year or so, is that the fact that the energy grid is so unstable and so unreliable almost acts as a catalyst for the local textile manufacturers to actually start transitioning to renewable energy systems, which they have on
Yeah.
site. Are you seeing that kind of repeated across maybe a few different geographies where you guys are active?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a couple of things in there, that kind of energy security piece. So first of all, like I was in Bangladesh earlier on this year, and having conversations with the production leaders and factory owners there. And you're absolutely right. The grid systems, or even from say like a natural gas perspective in Bangladesh, when those go down, to be able to keep their facilities going, actually having rooftop solar, or to have biomass boilers that are able to secure that energy, which in turn, from a decarbonisation perspective, that does in a number of cases have lower carbon impact for some of those technologies. So I think if we look at the overall kind of transition of the industry, which is going to take a number of years, some of these low hanging fruit, when we talk about the efficiency play, the business cases it's put forward, that's what really kind of wins it and gets it across the line in this current space that we're in at the moment. So I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of energy security. And I think I would also just add, a more broader point here to say that every country is very different. There is like very different dynamics. If we look at a production facility in, say, China, where they've got a centralized purchase steam facility, where that is piped out to a number of the different factories within that park, versus, as I said, Bangladesh, where it's like natural gas as a predominant fuel within that country, versus, Vietnam. There's such different dynamics. You almost have a different problem to solve in each of those countries. So that this certainly is a challenge, that sort of difference across country and region.
Yeah, one thing that I've found interesting. So I often get asked about whether I see the Southern Hemisphere being intrinsically behind on climate change mitigation work versus the Northern Hemisphere, and whether that's likely to change. What I find much more valuable is to look at value chains. Because, for example, I find actually there are components of the textile value chain and apparel value chain everywhere in the world that are more or less best in class to the same standard, basically. Like if you take, let's say, a large textile business in India or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, the stuff that they're doing is not necessarily any further behind what I would see in the UK or Europe for a company of the same revenue bracket in a different sector, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because the pressure is so high on these companies that they're all trying to actually, and the competition is also so fierce, that they're all trying to push the bar on innovation to see just how far they can raise it. Is that your observation as well?
Yeah, I would certainly see that. I would also just like add that, there is a very broad range of capability out there. If you think about like the number of production facilities across all of those tiers. So we've got, if you look at the apparel value chain, we have, at the start, kind of tier 4. So you're talking about raw material, cotton, through to your ginning, your spinning, weaving, dyeing, and then your cut and sew. Like each one of those different elements within the value chain has a very different sort of dynamic. So, for example, your spinning facilities are going to be a lot more electrified there, versus your dyeing facilities, really, where there's a lot of energy consumption in that dyeing process. This is kind of where we're putting a lot of focus in on that sort of tier 2 space. And I think I would, coming back to your question, Seth, the kind of the split of maturity, I think, is very broad and wide. And I think that could be at, a country level, regional level, and global level. So I would say that, there's good and bad suppliers in everywhere on the planet. It's really around finding those right partners that are strategically aligned with your ambitions and what you're trying to achieve as a brand, and then really kind of ensuring that you have alignment within the business to continue that partnership longer term.
And Paul, what does a good partnership look like? Like, what are the ingredients for an effective engagement on both sides of the fence? Like, what do you see you guys bringing to the table as H&M, but then also what do you see a good supplier bringing to the table in terms of what they're willing to put into the partnership?
It's something that we focus on at H&M a lot. The very nature of apparel and the season to season, the buy to buy, type of transactions within the supply chain really kind of do push this kind of supplier like buyer relationship to be, quite transactional just by its nature in the industry. H&M, this is something that is absolutely, front and center, and it has continued to be a focus over the last couple of years, and really kind of identifying who are our strategic partners so we can give them, long, steady volumes. And I would actually say that this starts like kind of more on the commercial side. So all those kind of commercial like dynamics, in play, whether it's the right price, the right service levels in terms of lead times, quality, all of these elements, plus sustainability needs to be in that evaluation. Once you've kind of got that kind of alignment, that long partnership, then we can then sort of like layer on all the sort of the benefits from a sustainability perspective on top of that. So from our side, we really do invest heavily with our suppliers. So once, a supplier works with us, we have, a minimum requirement in terms of a lot of the sustainability topics. And that's, a right to operate, at that baseline to ensure that all of our facilities kind of meet that level. And, if they don't, it's an absolute no-go. And then really kind of putting in place capability development programs from our side. So we're truly got skin in the game with people, working, partnering with facilities. We've touched on the decarbonisation and that kind of energy efficiency. We've got energy efficiency engineers, teams that are going into factories and really partnering with our production sites to drive that efficiency piece. And so that's kind of really our part, and that partnership, plus from a technology perspective and ease of doing business. So we have a very mature technology landscape and supplier portal, for example, where we can almost like tightly couple the relationship through technology. And then sort of on the other side, from the supplier side, really kind of to be aligned with our ambitions. We haven't really talked so far around some of H&M's ambitions, what we're expecting of our suppliers. And so for us to really kind of communicate that and to ensure that our suppliers really understand, like, this is the journey that we're on, like, kind of, are you with us? It's very, very important. What we expect from our suppliers is a really kind of a deeper engagement around, some of those longer term objectives, which are very important to us. So that's our expectation from the suppliers that we work with.
And Paul, you've articulated a wide range of sort of micro interventions going into the factory, helping with the energy efficiency. I know there's a lot of cool stuff that H&M is doing on waste as well, and trying to bring better waste management practices into the value chain also. Is there stuff at a macro level? I mean, we touched a little on renewable energy systems, for instance. Is there stuff that you guys are doing on the policy front? I saw the news around the big Bangladesh program around renewable energy financing. What's happening at that kind of macro level?
Yeah, so it's a very important part of our approach, and it's something that we have significant teams in that sort of, we call it the public affairs side of our business, where we're really kind of engaging in that sort of energy policy and engagement with local and regional governments on, whether it's like the social side, ensuring that there's that sort of social kind of protection, or on the energy and water side, for example, in the environmental piece. And so what does that look like? It's a lot of like engagement, with whether it's like Europe or the US, and, from a policy perspective, and then ensuring that those policies really kind of meet what the industry really needs to transform itself. There's been a recent example in Indonesia, where kind of opening up the REC, so an ability to draw down on renewable electricity into facilities, which wasn't previously available. H&M played a key role there. And you've hit on a couple of other examples where we partnering with other brands. So it was Bestseller and H&M in the Bangladesh example. So wind farms and that type of investment to ensure that, through those, say, like power purchase agreement opportunities, that we're also playing in those spaces. Maybe just to kind of spin back out and like talk about some other elements within the overall piece would be around kind of innovation. Innovation is kind of really key for us.
Where is innovation happening that you're excited by and proud of? And where is innovation actually lagging, where you'd love to see much more action on?
Yeah, so how we look at innovation at H&M, there's really kind of three buckets. Like, first of all, like seed, scale, and then operationalize. So the H&M Foundation is really an organization that's kind of separate from H&M, but there's some close partnerships there where we really look to invest in those very early stage innovations. And we've recently pivoted. There's something called the Global Change Award, where we identify those startups really in that decarbonisation space. So we're kind of aligning our ambitions to this very early stage innovation piece. And so a few examples here. So Textile Genesis on the traceability side, they were as part of this, and now as a supplier of mine that I work with on the traceability, and that sits in our portfolio. Also, actually, I recently came back from Cambridge University, where Petit Flea was a smaller brand that has some kids clothes, where they have a very unique material that actually grows, with the kid as they grow. So
No
essentially,
way.
you can buy a
Be
garment
serious.
for a kid at 2 years old, and it will still fit them at 3.
Oh my
It's a
God.
beautiful, beautiful product. We met the founder there, and she was part of that Global Change Award and had gone through its basically funding that we give. It's, about €2 million grant, plus it's an accelerator program. So it's that very early stage, that seed piece that we invest in. There's a second element that I mentioned around scaling. So this is the H&M Group Ventures. So this is typically your kind of Series A and Series B investment. Few examples in here. So Colorifics, they're based out of the UK. It's like a bio-based dye. So there's a number of benefits here where, it's obviously from a chemicals versus, bio-based dye. There's huge benefits from that, both in the production and in the consumer end of that particular transition, as well as even kind of a lower temperature required for that dyeing process with Colorifics. Another example is Smartex, where it is during the spinning process, we're using kind of cameras and AI technology to read as the spinning process continues and that weaving process. We're able to identify those defects very early in the process, and then reducing any of the production issues and quality control. So that's H&M Group Ventures. And then the sort of transition finance or green finance initiative, which is really that, okay, how can we deploy capital into the supply chain and that operationalizing piece? So as I said, if you're a strategic partner, you have access to a number of different funding mechanisms. It's certainly not like a one size fits all, because it's going to be very different depending on the supplier, depending on the technology that's used. But there's things like waterless dyeing that we're, deploying into operations. And so, again, as I've mentioned, that tier 2, there's a real focus from a decarbonisation around that tier 2. So there's there's things like that where, that 500 million euro fund of green finance initiative is really kind of being deployed, into the operations of our value chain.
Paul, if I was to ask you maybe the inverse side of this question, which is, let's say that you were an innovator today and you're out there looking for an opportunity to create an innovation that is going to create lots of impact and also create lots of commercial value. What is it that you would innovate for the apparel sector and value chain in particular? Like, are there some big unmet needs, some areas that you think more entrepreneurs should get into or more scale needed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think what I love about the apparel industry is that it is so diverse. If we look at everything from regenerative agriculture for cotton through to end of life and that whole like circular piece, and a lot of change and transformation that's going on at that end of the supply chain and everything else in between. It's an old industry. We're talking, a 300, 400-year-old industry. Things have changed, but they haven't changed like significantly. There is a huge opportunity for each of those spaces, along the entire value chain for innovation. So I think it's kind of a bit of a cop out on your question, but I would say that I'm seeing innovation in kind of all of those spaces, but maybe just from a pure, push from a policy perspective. There's certainly a lot that's going on in terms of extended producer responsibility and that end of the supply chain. I think that's driving a lot, as well as obviously decarbonisation. We haven't spoken about it yet, but if I just talk briefly to our ambitions within H&M. So, we have a net zero target for 2040, and that covers scope 1, 2, and 3. It's an absolute target. So really kind of a decade before, many of our competitors, and then a negative 56% for 2030. So this is really, it's a extremely like tough challenge to meet, because of that shared resources within the value chain. We work, within the factories that we work in, there's other brands that are also there. So, we really kind of need to have this sort of collaborative approach and this, strategic partnership there. So yeah, coming back to your question, really kind of the decarbonisation piece within production is really kind of key for us.
Paul, if we segue a little onto the challenge of bringing along manufacturing partners that you share with other brands. We had a similar conversation with Charles Kahn, chair of Patagonia, and the approach that he articulated that Patagonia takes is he said that they look to take out the mortgage and charge other brands the rent. And what he meant by that is that Patagonia might be the first mover on an intervention, and then they look to bring in other brands to kind of claim their part of the program. Is that a little like the approach that you guys are taking? I mean, I look at Bangladesh, for instance, which, as you said, you've managed to bring in your peers as well to collaborate. I'm sure you have more of that sort of stuff going on around the world.
That's right.
Is that a winning strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I think every lever that is available to us, we're looking at kind of pulling on those, and collaboration is absolutely key. And we see ourselves like being part of. So we think about like the Apparel Impact Institute or Cascale. There's a number of others that really kind of are vehicles for bringing brands together to then deploy, capital into that transformation that's required at the supplier side. And I know we've mentioned that Colin's going to be on your podcast a number of weeks. He has this real vision of like focusing on the top 1,500 facilities globally, because that is 80% of the emissions. So if we can really kind of collaborate as an industry around those 1,500 facilities, that really kind of does take us forward, really kind of drives that change through that prioritization. But we really do need to be kind of locking arms across brands, and there's a number of forums, whether that's at the CEO level or the sustainability lead level, that really kind of come into play. So yeah, I think there's a number of levers there that all need to be pulled to kind of really drive this change. But we certainly see ourselves as a as a leader, kind of pushing this agenda in the industry.
Do you think the digital passporting is going to accelerate a lot of this as it drives transparency, maybe as it drives additional use cases
Yeah,
on top of transparency?
it's a great question, and the way that I see it is that the digital product passport really provides the foundation of the direction of travel that the industry needs to go in. And at the moment, if you look at trying to understand the impact of a certain product, you're going to have different measures through different mechanisms. So the digital product passport is that vehicle and is that foundation to bring all of the data points together. And then within that passport, say, for example, the PEF, so the product environmental footprint, and that work that is currently underway, due to be finalized like next year, that will then be a plug into that passport, so that you have the vehicle of that passport with the product, and then you can add in these various like data points. And through ESPR, which within Europe is the eco design legislation, kind of looking into the crystal ball and how that might evolve, I think there's a lot of opportunities there as well, with how the digital product passport, PEF, and then kind of ESPR can then sort of ratchet the evolution of having lower impact products in the market. So I think, to come back to your question, I feel like the digital product passport is a starter. And I hope that will kind of evolve with, various methodologies that could, be part of that as the industry evolves.
Super exciting, and certainly I think a lot more innovation to come, Paul. Paul, just as we sort of wind up, the question we usually ask people on this podcast is, if you think about our listeners as typically being others in your shoes in other organizations, is there any advice that you'd offer to them as they look to build their supply chain engagement programs, as they look to incorporate digital tooling, any of the sort of bases that you cover? What is the one most important piece of advice that you'd want to share?
Yeah. I think I would keep it very simple, Seth. I would coin it as like, who are you not listening to? I think like listening as a skill is just really fundamental in this space, because we're working with, specifically, so if we're talking about the scope 3, it's a set of partners. So really kind of understanding and empathizing with those partners, where are they? What are their challenges? And, through that sort of deeper listening, that really kind of provides the foundation to then go and solve, rather than kind of think, oh, okay, this is the solution, how we're going to push it onto our supply base. I think just a little quote in here is that most people do not listen with their intent to understand, but they listen as an intent to reply. I kind of really like that, because I think it's very simple, but quite difficult to do. So anything that can be done, to build on that, whether that's sort of like workshopping with your strategic partners on key topics, on key ambitions, bringing those conversations together to have that sort of deeper listening, and then building solutions off the back of it, I think is really, really critical. And just kind of getting the most out of, for me specifically, looking kind of with my sort of digital and sustainability hat, just really kind of ensuring that the team is well looked after, ensuring that kind of team engagement, ensuring that they're really kind of growing and developing. They've got that right balance, so that ourselves as a team, we're plugged into, whether it's sustainability team or the business team, to really kind of solve this problem together, because we absolutely can't do it in isolation. So we need to make sure we have a seat at the table at all of those conversations.
So true. And Paul, I'm going to try and steal that piece about listening with the intent of replying rather than listening with the intent to understand. Thank you so much, Paul. Really enjoyed this conversation. I'm looking forward to our next catch up as well, where we could kind of take things further. But I've really appreciated having you on this show. Thank you so much. And we'll speak again soon.
Perfect. Thanks, Seth. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.